In this video I'm going to introduce you to the Zorki 1C. This is the closest thing you're going to get to a £50 Leica camera. Let's take a look. Hi guys, Matt here from MrLeica.com. So in this video we're not talking Leica, but we're talking almost Leica. And I will compare a Zorki to a Leica. So as you can see, we haven't got just the Zorki 1C. I've also brought some of his friends with me. So we've got the Kiev here, which I've done a video on before. We've got the Zorki 4 in the middle, which I still need to do a review on. Feel free to hit subscribe if you want to see that in the future. I've got a Fed 2, which is one of my very first film cameras. Again, I still need to do a review on this. And then at the back there, I've got a Leica 3A, which is very, very similar to this camera. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So first off, what is a Zorki 1C? The full name is a KMZ Zorki 1C. And it was manufactured between 1951 and 1953. The Zorki 1C is actually based on a Fed camera, which in turn was based on the Leica 2 camera. I always say that it's a clone of a Leica 3, but it's actually based on the Leica 2. The most popular cameras in the 1930s were the small 35mm Leica cameras, and so the Soviets then decided they wanted to make their own copy or their own version of that camera. First they had the Fed cameras, but then because of the Second World War, that factory was at risk of being bombed, so they moved the machinery to a different factory, which is the KMZ factory or KMZ. KMZ made this, and this is based on the Fed. And if you find an early Zorki C camera, sometimes they have Zorki and Fed engravings on the camera, kind of when they were changing between the names. In terms of what you get on this camera, you can see the nice engraving there, the former Soviet Union. This camera will give you almost everything the same as a older Leica camera, but in terms of specifics, this camera gives you shutter speed from 20th of a second through to 500ths of a second, plus bulb mode. It has a cold shoe on the top, rather than a hot shoe, which is normal for this period. It has a separate rangefinder and viewfinder, the same as on the old Leica cameras, rather than a combined window like you would say find on the Fed 2 over here. The later Zorkis and the Kiev, you can see the viewfinder windows are much bigger compared to the very modest viewfinder window on the older camera. If we pop the bottom, I can show you inside. So these cameras load exactly the same as the old Leica cameras, where you have to cut the film strip before loading, rather than it being rear door hinge opening like you get on most of the later ones. Well, all the later ones. So it is a bit slower to load, but it's no different from loading my older Leica film cameras. So this has got a cloth focal plane shutter. The Zorki C has an M39 thread mount, or LTM, often known as Leica thread mount, or L39, the 39mm thread. The only difference is the flange distance is slightly different on Soviet cameras compared to Leica cameras, which means if you put a fast Leica lens on a Soviet camera or a fast Soviet lens on a Leica camera, sometimes you might miss focus slightly because of the different pitch. The standard lens for this camera is the Industar 22, which is a 50mm f3.5 coated lens, as you can see by the little blue tint on the glass itself. This is a collapsible lens, so you need to extend it fully and lock it into place before taking your pictures, otherwise your photos won't be sharp. It also has the focus lock, the same as on the vintage Leica lenses. Now I have done a test of these lenses side by side against Leica lenses. So if I quickly bring the Leica to the front, and if I put the Leica lens, which is the 5cm 3.5 Elmar on the Leica, now we have exactly kind of like for like. So for me, I think of the Zorki 1C as a Leica 3A clone, because I have a few different Leicas. The Zorki is very slightly taller, especially with the slow shutter speed dial protruding from the top, whereas the slow shutter speed dial on the Leica is on the front. From a side view, the Leica lens goes very slightly more compact than the Industar 22. From the back of the camera, you can see that the Zorki has the same arrangement, where you have the rangefinder and then the viewfinder in separate windows rather than combined. But the advantage of this later Leica 3 camera is it has the diopter on the rangefinder, which I find useful as someone that's short-sighted. Equally, you can see the strap lugs on the Leica are absent on the Zorki. So often people use the Zorki cameras in a half case, and that way you don't need the strap lugs. Both of these cameras have a close focus distance of 1 meter, and both cameras don't have parallax correction, meaning if you're focusing close, you need to compensate for your framing compared to shooting at infinity. When you're unloading film on a Leica, you move this switch to R, and that then allows you to rewind the film. Whereas on a Zorki, you turn this dial here from here to here, and then it does the same job like so. So very easy to use, and in terms of the final pictures, they are very, very similar. This is the key thing. When I compared both these lenses, again, see that video, you're not really going to tell any difference. The main reason you may want to get a Leica is they had improved quality controls, so you can see the finish is much nicer on this Leica than on the, you see the dual finish on this Zorki. And then if you think about that in terms of internals as well, the Leicas are built to a higher refinement than the Soviet cameras, but the Soviet cameras were never meant to be a refined machine, so they're not trying to be anything less than what they kind of started out to be. You also notice here that I didn't mention, this is a flash sync port. To advance the next frame, you turn this, and then you press your shutter here, and you always advance your frame before you change your shutter, otherwise you've got a chance of stripping the insides of the camera. So like that. It's got a really nice sound, no different from a Leica. And then when you come to rewind your film, this is your rewind knob. If I bring up a few photos, first thing to note, I bought this camera during the kind of lockdown. So the first photo, this is me doing a mirror selfie with the Zorki C and a Jupiter 12 lens, and I just guessed the 35mm composition. Here is another maybe weird mirror selfie where I was photographing into the mirror because of the 1 meter close focus distance to then focus on the Hasselblad behind me. And then this mirror selfie is slightly different. So this is me using a Leica Nookie Hessam adapter with the Industar lens kind of jammed into it. See my video on close focus adapters if you want to know more about how to close focus a Zorki camera. This photo is me out on a run, just running around the local area looking for anything that caught my eye in terms of trying to shoot a test roll and get some images. And then lastly, one proper photo, local model, and this photo is shot with the Jupiter 12 again, 35mm lens, 35 2.8, again on Fomapan 100 I believe. As you can see, you can get really nice images, even though it is a low price Soviet camera. And talking of low price, how much do these cameras cost? You can pick up one of these cameras on eBay for as little as £50 from Ukraine and former Soviet Union countries. And so that makes it around 6 times cheaper than the Leica camera, which is going to take arguably almost identical photos. And it's going to make it roughly 44 times cheaper than the Leica M6. So obviously the downside of these cameras is they are screw mount and not M mount. So you can't say mount the latest Voigtlander Nocturne 50mm f1 lens to this camera, whereas you can mount it to say an M3 and M6. But if you're happy to use vintage lenses, then they offer an absolute bargain price, I think. So in terms of some pros and cons between Zorki and Leica, I'd say the Zorki gives you the same experience as the Leica, but on a much lower budget. And it might be an ideal purchase if you're looking to get a Leica camera or a rangefinder camera and you're not sure if you want to buy one. Buy one of these first. If you enjoy it, you can always later get a Leica 3 camera or a Leica M camera. As I mentioned, these cameras are extremely cheap at less than £50, and that also makes them very low risk. Like if you're worried about taking a Leica M6 to some dodgy part of town, if you have this as your second camera or your third camera, you're not going to be too worried if you're taking this into like a sketchy part of a city. In terms of size, if I move the Leica out of the way for a second, as I say, it's slightly larger than a Leica 3 camera, the 3A that I just showed you, and it's slightly smaller than a Fed 2, and it's definitely smaller than a Zorki 4. The Zorki 4s are starting to get a bit bigger, as you can see there. But obviously you get a much nicer, bigger, bright viewfinder window if you get the Zorki 4. So I will do a review on this at some point when I get a chance to use it. I included the Kiev because it's a Soviet camera, but it's not really the same system because this is a Contax RF mount and all the others are M39 mount. But I wanted to include it just because it can take amazing photos, so there's nothing wrong with these Soviet cameras. In terms of cons, if you want to call it a con, these cameras are less refined as mentioned than the Leica, so if you want something more refined, perhaps pay a little bit extra and get a Leica, and also the quality control is less stringent than Leica. But with that said, when buying old cameras from the 1950s, you've got roughly an equal chance between buying a vintage Leica and a vintage Zorki, and the Zorki working and the Leica not, or the Leica working and the Zorki not. When you're buying a camera this old, you really do need to expect to give it a full CLA to get the best from the camera. Where I did a video showing that of the Leica 3 cameras that I bought, quite a few of them needed a full CLA or maybe a new shutter or some other major problem before I was able to use them. And so in conclusion, I think the Zorkis offer the same Leica experience at a fraction of the cost, and will give you near identical photos for anybody who's not pixel peeping. I might try and do a city break at some point this year and take a Leica 3 camera and the Zorki 1C, and I'm fairly certain we probably won't be able to tell the difference between the two sets of images. And with that said, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and as always, a massive thanks to my patrons. If you've not yet subscribed, you may want to consider doing so to be part of my monthly giveaways. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.